and I know, oh, what, stuff we use on the snake, we don't use on the green and vice versa. Stuff we use on the green below Fontenelle, we don't use on the A section on the green or the C section on the green. So, I mean, it really, so hopefully, someday we can get to the point where people can call up, say, hey, I'm going here. You can always call the fly shops, but honestly, fly shops are, and you're going to be there, Lynn. Fly shops are there to sell flies, right? So,
Oh, yeah. Well, and, they tell you what, is working. And you buy that and you go out and try it, and half the time it doesn't work anyway. But yeah, they're in it to sell flies. So anyway, lots of good stuff we're working on, making the Heber Fly Shop better. More videos. George and I are actually heading up on the green tomorrow, and hopefully it'll be good. And if the fishing's good, then we'll probably go back next week and have DJ videotape us. I was talking to him. He came down after all you guys left on Saturday. I was talking to him about, the video stuff, and he's got microphones, George. You can wear one, I can wear one, and he can hear what we're saying.
oh, is that
So,
right?
yeah, so probably I'll have you be doing the fishing, and then I'll kind of be the commentator on it. And anyway, it ought to be fun. We ought to start getting some really good footage that way.
Well, hopefully fishing's good tomorrow.
Yeah,
We haven't fished there for a long time.
the weather looks good.
Weather looks great, but I haven't fished there. I haven't fished there since, no, I don't know, October, middle of October, maybe. Been a while.
All right. Well, tonight we were in for a treat. George is going to teach us how he rigs up with his nymph fishing drop shot method. Now, Kevin, I've got some drawings of George's rigging. What's the best way for me to show that?
Right now?
Send it to you.
You could do that. Yeah. Yeah, if you wanted to send them to me, that'd be fine. I can
right.
I can put them on the screen.
Yeah, let me send those over to you, and then you can put them up on the screen. Let's see.
Okay.
That's not working. How do I do it on my screen, Kevin?
You share your screen.
Just share it?
So at the bottom, if you put your cursor down somewhere down there at the bottom,
I see it.
Share screen thing.
Okay.
And then they'll let you pick the app you want to share.
All right. Let's see if I can pull that up. Okay, so I've got it up now. So how do I share that?
Hang on, let me look at this again. Hang on.
Advanced sharing options, multiple participant share.
Yeah, there should just be you should be able to click that share screen and then pick which screen it is.
Okay, so when I click on that, it says one participant, multiple participants, advanced sharing options.
That's probably one of the new features of the Pro account. Can you do all participants?
Yeah, it says multiple participants can share simultaneously.
Oh.
So it's up there, but I don't know how to actually show it to you.
Yeah, why don't you just send it over to me and I'll put it on.
Well, the problem is when I hit my screen to send it over to you, it just shows the Zoom screen instead of, oh, there it is. Okay. All right, that'll work. Okay, so Kevin.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's coming, Kevin.
You'll get a invite or a notification from me that I'm waiting in the lobby. I'm gonna open up my other computer so I can share on that one and then stay on the
Okay.
video and talk on this one.
All right. I just added you there.
We'll get a
Yeah.
lot better. We'll get a lot better at this.
Yeah. Did you get it?
All right. Yep, I did. I'm pulling it up now.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay, that looks like what we did. So anyway, so let's just start. And so, this is what's called, a drop shot rig. And I've been fishing like this since, I don't know, forever. First started seeing this type of fishing with the sinkers on the bottom of your line, and that's basically what it is. Sinkers are on the bottom instead of above your flies, they're below your flies. And there's some reasons why I feel like that's, I'll say, has its advantages. There are some disadvantages, but we'll talk about both. And but you know, I started with seeing guys on the Provo River when I was, oh geez, Lindsay, just when I first started fly fishing in about 1976. And I watched these old guys with monofilament line and tags coming off their line with sinkers on the bottom and an old fly rod with an old Johnson monofilament reel stuck on a fly rod. And they were just tearing up the fish on the Provo. And I couldn't catch a fish. And these guys were just catching these, you know, anywhere from 18 to 22-inch brown trout and letting them go. And I just was so frustrating to me. But not until we started fishing the beaverhead and I saw guys doing that on the beaverhead, and we just started trying it, you know, with a fly rod. And it's worked for us. But so the whole concept is, as you guys see that, is that those sinkers bounce along the bottom. And in reality, it's, I mean, people don't call this, it's very much like Euro nipping. I mean, it really is. It's a tight line. It's a tight line method to your indicator, if nothing else, right? So if you think about tight, Euro nymphing is like what's called tight line fishing. And in reality, the way that these sinkers work, where they kind of bounce along, drag along, and they sometimes they'll just tap along the bottom, tap, 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 tap. But what that effectually does is makes the line from your indicator down to the sinkers a tight line method. It really does. And so people will say, well, you know, I don't like my flies hitting the bottom because they hang up and all that. Well, those sinkers, I mean, Lindsay, they rarely hang up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
once in a while, but rarely they'll hang up. And
Well,
so
you don't want them banging along the bottom.
no, just ticking. You want
Yeah.
them ticking, and you want to see just a little movement. And people say, well, yeah, but then you think it's a fish hitting your indicator. You can tell the difference. I mean, sometimes it's really subtle, but you get to the point you can tell the difference. But if you look at the picture Lindsay drew, and he's a way better artist than me. But if you look at, so here's the quiz, Kevin, for you and Shane. Where is the water faster, on the top of the river or the bottom of the river?
Bottom.
Where is it faster? Where do you think, guys think?
I think the top.
Okay, so absolutely at the top. So if you look at the bottom of the river it slows the water down. Anytime you have structure, I don't care if it's on the bottom of the river, on the side of the river, the bank of the river, a tree, a snag sitting out in the river. Anytime you have a place where the current gets deflected, it causes the current to slow down. And so what happens if when people just like throw their thing out there and it's never touching the bottom and their flies are whipping down the river as fast as the current's going, that looks unnatural to the fish because they're down in this zone where the water is actually slower than it is at the surface. And so as you fish with this kind of a rig, you'll see a little bubble as your indicator goes down. You can tell that your indicator is going about the right speed if it's going slower than the current just a little bit. You'll see a little bubble of water kind of build up on the I'll call it the upstream side of the indicator, right? You'll see that little bubble of water. And a lot of times, that indicator doesn't plunge. You'll just see it come down, and I'll see that little bubble of water get a little taller on the indicator. So I call that slowing down, right? So it just starts to slow down a bit. And so what you do is you just take your rod tip. Oh, where's my hand? Here's my hand. Take your rod tip, just go like this. I call it a microset. You just tiny it, because if you think about me doing this on a 10-foot rod, what do you think the tip of that rod's doing, right? It's probably moving, I don't know. Where's my mirror? It's probably moving 10 inches or so. And that's plenty of distance to set the hook on a fish. An inch is plenty of distance to set the hook on a fish. But anyway, so that's kind of the why I personally like to fish drop shot. There are some disadvantages. That's the advantages. I catch a lot more fish with drop shot. I get hung up a lot less. I lose a lot less flies. So those are 3 advantages that I see. One disadvantage of drop shot is it's more difficult to cast. Wouldn't you agree with that, Lindsay?
Oh, for sure, especially for a new person.
Yeah, it's more difficult to cast. So, you don't come back with your fly rod, if you're casting a dry fly, you're going to cast back there, unroll, you're going to come forward, leave your rod tip high, let the line unfold. It's more of you whip it back. And a lot of times we'll actually flip our line down in the water and pick our rod up in what's called a water load, right? You actually load the fly line with the water, and you just, as you come forward, you just give it a haul and kind of just to finish the cast. That's one way to do it. The other way is to make a really ugly cast, like big wide open loop,
Yeah,
and just come over. And that's the other way to do it. So you just have to know that it's not the normal casting stroke for, let's say, a streamer that you're a single fly rig, like whether you're doing a streamer or whatever. It's just different.
well, there's another technique called inline, where the sinkers are above the fly,
Right.
and it's a lot easier to handle. It's a lot easier to cast, but you do not know where your flies are really, because
Ever.
the sinker's hitting the bottom and then your flies are floating up in the air somewhere or in the water above. Whereas this way, if you look at the sinker ticking the bottom, you pretty much know where your flies are.
And I'll say this, and this is just from experience, and I don't, it's my opinion, obviously, but from experience too. I've watched guys fish I've stand by guys that fish the other way, like inline right lens all the time.
Yeah.
And honestly, unless that indicator pretty much plunges and goes down, they don't know they have a fish on. That's just my opinion.
Right. Yeah.
They just don't know. Or if they wait until that indicator straightens out, and the fish takes it, and then the indicator straightens out till it stops, that fish has probably is already hooked itself, for about 3 seconds,
Right.
2 to 3 seconds. Where with this method like this, the minute I see that indicator even start to slow down, I just give it a little. Lindsay will tell you, I just give it a little tug, don't I, Lindsay?
Yeah.
And when I'm fishing froggy water, which really doesn't have much current, I just cast out there and I let till it's kind of stops. I just pull it a little bit, pull it a little bit, pull a little bit, maybe a little cat.
Let me tell you this. I've fished with George now for how long, George? 4 years?
Oh, at least 4,
5?
5. Well, 5, because I retired in 2019 and we've been fishing since I retired.
So 5 years, and I can tell you, I've never fished anywhere where anybody has outfished George, ever, not one time. You look around and George is just hauling them in, and he outfishes me, and I'm doing pretty good, but you'll look out and look around and there'll be guys all over and they're hardly catching any fish at all.
And it's not because I have a secret fly. It's not because anything. It's just I set the hook more because I think I see more takes. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I think fishing, I think Lance said this, right? Hook sets are free. So And you want to get to the point where your hook set's not like fishing for marlin. I mean, I do that once in a while. You get excited, you'll do that. But I mean, hook sets don't need to be more than just like that. Just because if that fish has got it in his mouth and you do that, that fish is gone, and then your indicator will go up. You know,
All right, now explain to him the actual makeup of your.
okay, so let's talk about the leader. So on this here, you'll see that Lindsay shows the indicator just coming right kind of off the fly line. So here's what I do. So from, we need to get a thing where I can actually show that somewhere, but from my fly line, so you have,
Is there a way to get a pointer on here? Do you know, Kevin?
there is, but I'm not sure how you do that. Let's see.
Yeah, there's an annotate button in the bottom left of your Zoom screen there, George.
And
It-
annotate. Oh yeah, I got it right
Right
here.
Oh,
above
yeah.
the
Oh,
menu.
yeah.
All right.
You
All right,
click
so-
that, then you can draw.
So right here, for example, here's Lindsay's indicator, and you'll see that he's got a little sectional line right here. And what that typically is for me is I want something that's a pretty decent size, because I don't use a tapered leader that you buy from whoever, right? I don't use tapered leaders for nymphing at all. I just run straight line. But up there where you're gonna basically take a piece, oh, I don't know, maybe I probably it's 8 or 9 inches at the most.
Well,
I
if you
tell
look
you-
over on the side, see it'll say 8 inches. Okay, so,
Yeah, 8 inches.
and then
right,
each of these sections, I've got written how long they are.
5 feet, 4 feet, yeah, about 10 feet total. And so I usually take 20, 30 pound tests, whatever is just convenient. And I tie a couple of perfection loops, right? And then from the fly line to that piece of 30 pound or 20 pound, and it's typically 20 pound, I just do a loop to loop. And that bigger line keeps the line from cutting into the loop on your fly line, which you don't want to do. So if you
Mhm.
put a really, like if I did 1X on that, that has a tendency to cut into the fly line. So using that bigger, just that little 8 inch section, it kind of helps the line to turn over a little bit. And it just preserves your fly line, right? Preserves the welded loop end on your fly line. And so I tie that, and then off of, Lindsay shows a tippet ring, which is actually very good to use. So instead of doing a double perfection loop, you just tie a perfection loop, connect it to your fly line, come down, tie on a tippet ring with whatever knot suits your fancy, double Davy, just a clinch knot, whatever.
And I have a write-up on all of this that we're explaining. So when we get done, I'll send an email out to everybody, so you'll have that written down. But look here
Perfect.
too. So between the fly line and that tippet ring, it's 20 pounds. Okay. So that's telling you how heavy that line is as well.
And that's just whatever, right? I mean, I just use 20 pound monofilament. I don't use 20 pound fluorocarbon. It's just,
Right.
that really is just something for me to preserve my fly line. That's what I look at it as. And there's times when I put my indicator in, I mean, in the old day, I might put my indicator, depending upon where I'm fishing, on that 20 pound test. Like I use Oros leaders or Oros indicators because, you unscrew them, you screw them on, they're right in the center of your line. They're way easier to cast than a thingamabobber or even a airlock, the little screw on airlock thing. They're easier to cast. I mean, they sometimes don't stay put as well as I'd like, but I'm figuring that out too, how to make sure that stays put. Anyway, so from there on that tippet ring or another perfection loop, I'll go with, anywhere from 0 to 1 to 2X, right? And that really depends. Somebody say, well, how do you choose? Well, I'm going to pick a line that's 2X bigger than what I'm using for my droppers, right? So if I'm fishing 4X down here for my droppers, I'll just fish 2X. If I'm fishing 3X, I'll use 1X. If I'm fishing 2X droppers on some rivers up in Alberta, I would go with 0X. And so what that does is that if I get broken off, I'm not losing my indicator, and it'll break down here in the, you know what I'm saying? You just kind of want to preserve, because see this little, where Lindsay has a swivel, I don't even remember what size those are, Lindsay. I think they're like a size, I can't remember, but they're tiny little swivels. And I tie a swivel above about, 20 inches above where I drop my first dropper. And all that does is that, just that swivel keeps your flies from twisting around your leader as much. I used to never do that. But since I've been using that for the last probably, I don't know, couple, 3 years, I find that my droppers get tangled. They don't wrap around the actual running line, right? They don't
Right.
wrap around it as much. So that helps. And I've never had one break or anything, so it works out really well. Then from there, I just,
So let me just say one thing here, George. So as you look here, you've got like 20-pound line. And when you look at this 0x and 2x, you're looking at 10-pound line roughly. And then when you come down here to 3 and 4x, you're looking at 7-pound line. So you're progressively getting lighter and lighter and lighter line, correct?
right. And then so, and then and you can see the length, right? So from that swivel to my bottom fly, to the bottom fly, to the end of the bottom fly, somewhere around 4 feet. And I just use that as a rule of thumb. It might be a little more, sometimes a little less, depending on how many times I've broken off, but I kind of start in that 4 to 5 foot range. And then from that last knot, so you see this knot right here. Oh, hang on. Where's the annotate button again? What did I do with that thing?
Up bottom left.
Hang on. There we go. I don't hang on. Keep click. I've got this annotate thing coming up here. I don't know what it did on me here, Kevin.
There you go. You're moving. I can see it.
Am I doing it? I don't see it. It's like I don't have control of it.
Well, tell me, I'll circle it.
Well, Lindsay, did you click the annotate button?
Yeah, so
Oh, hang on. Here we go. Click. I got it. All right. So from this knot right here, where that's attached to that, so from there down to these sinkers, I usually, anywhere from a foot to 18 inches, depending on, well, it doesn't really depend on a lot. I just, whatever tickles my fancy, but usually anywhere from 12 inches to 18 inches. I put that down, tie a knot in the end, just put however many sinkers I think I need to get on the bottom, get it ticking along. And I always tie that 1x smaller. So if you do hang up your sinkers and they break off, you don't break off any of your flies. You just break off that sinker tag in, and then you go up here and, use a double surgeon's knot or something and tie another piece on, and away you go.
yeah, so in this particular setup, and when you read the instructions, that's going to end up being 5x. So everything above it's 4x, then like 2x, and then 20 pounds. So
Right.
when that sinker gets stuck in the rocks and you bust it, the only thing that's going to bust off is that sinker tag.
You lose the sinkers, and so that's, that preserves, you'll lose flies breaking fish off, and you'll lose flies, once in a while, because of this kind of rig, a fish will wrap up and get what we call all wrapped up, so they get foul hooked on one of the other hooks. But that happens. I don't care how you're fishing, that happens. But and you, once in a while, you'll break up, you go to net it and you'll catch a fly. But for the most part, I don't worry much about that, because we just catch a lot of fish this way. So it works good.
Worth it.
Yeah, it's worth it. But you can see it's about a 10-foot. I have a 10-foot nymphing rod. My rod is a Sage. What's that? Sage R8, Lynn? Sage R8.
R8-6 or.
And I would encourage anybody, if you're going to be a serious nymph fisherman, long rods are your friend. 9.5, 10-foot rod, they're your friend, because you can keep so much line off the water. It's so much easier to mend. The only bad part about that is when you go to net the fish, you got, an extra foot sticking up in the air. So you got to kind of figure out how to get fish close enough, but that's really pretty much immaterial. Now, so you can see here, I'll move that indicator up and down this piece of line right here. I'll move that indicator up and down that depending upon the depth. If we're fishing a really, really shallow piece of water, and I know there's a lot of fish in there, I might move that indicator down to that, right? Or put a tiny indicator on and put it down there. If I'm in deep water, then I move it clear back up here. So that's why I like those Oros indicators. They're really simple to move up and down this. Now, fishing a river like the Snake, where we don't I don't fish this way on the snake. I just use the bottom fly as the weight, right, Lindsay? I use a
Right.
heavily weighted streamer, leech or something. But you don't want to be touching the bottom on the snake. The minute you do, you just start, you might as well dump your fly box out in the river because you're gonna lose the fly every single time.
Huh.
So yeah, you hook up on that basalt and it's just, it is so wicked. You cannot get a fly. I mean, I've hooked a fly on that basalt right by my feet and had to bend over and take it off the rock because you can't get it off. But for what we fish on drop shot, this is just the standard rig. I mean, it's simple. But then once you get done with this, it's just watch that indicator. I mean, you just watch the indicator. And anytime that indicator does something that doesn't look natural, hook sets are free, man. The micro set, right?
Now, also in the email that I send out to everybody, it's going to have the knots. Okay, so when a person, first of all, let me back up. So a brand new guy, and I'm going to show, I couldn't figure out how to get out of this view so I could send you the other email, or the other drawing. But when you have a tapered leader, okay, right here on the end of the line, right here, there's a loop, okay, and the loop looks like that. And then when you get a tapered leader, it has a loop just like it. And so the brand new guys, they don't have to know how to tie a knot. They just come onto the fly line and they hook the leader that has a loop onto the fly line that has a loop. And then they've got 9 feet of running line. They don't have any of these knots, any of this stuff on that leader. Okay, and it tapers. The problem is it starts at like 40 pounds on the butt section, and it's a lot thicker as it comes down, and you can get it in any kind of X size. So it'll say like 9 foot, and then it'll say 3, or well, let's say it's 4X, so it's comparable to this. So on a tapered leader, it would start up here, okay, on the loop to loop, and then go all the way down to the very end, 9 feet long, and the last 2 to 3 feet are going to be 4X tippet. So what that does is a brand new guy doesn't have to know how to tie any knots. He just does a loop to loop. He can come clear down to the very end and actually tie his fly on the very end right here. So let's say he has 1 fly, and then he comes up about 2 feet and ties a sinker on. So he can actually nymph fish, and he'll put his indicator up on the top. He can actually nymph fish without having to know how to do all this. Okay. And so a brand new guy can get out and start fishing. But when you try to compare this rig of George's to a tapered leader line, George is going to catch 20 to 1 the number of fish that this guy does. And the reason being is that thick tapered butt section of 40 pounds is just going to be drug along in the water. It's going to take that sinker or that indicator down real quickly. And that guy's going to have to do inline rigging where the sinker's above the flies. And so we've got, I'll be sending out to everybody in an email this picture, the picture of a tapered leader, and the instructions on how to do both. So if we got a brand new guy and he doesn't know how to tie knots, he can tie the loop-to-loop connection and go out and start fishing with an indicator rig. Okay. And then I'm going to send another list of all the knots. So each of these knots, if you start at the top, right here, there's a nail knot, okay, where you're going to tie this 20 pound onto the fly line. You're going to come down here to where the tippet ring is. See, and George does a perfection loop, okay, and you can tie 2 perfection loops, one on this little butt section and one on this bigger piece, and hook them loop to loop right there. Okay, so I'll have a perfection loop drawn. And then when you come down here to where the swivel is, if you don't want to tie the swivel or mess with that, you can you can put a blood knot or a double uni knot. And that's what I do, is I tie a double uni knot right here.
Or a surgeon's knot or double surgeon's, triple.
Right. And
You can tie,
I want to start using the swivel, but I haven't. And then you come down, and each of these tags are going to be tied on with a double or a triple surgeon's knot. So you've got a tag now. And then the knots are going to be tied on with whatever, a clinch knot, a loop knot, a Davy knot, and whatever. And then the sinker, I actually put on the very tag end, I just tie an overhand knot, and I actually have a tag sticking out. So there's a knot right here so the sinkers don't slide off.
yeah, you got to have that knot. Yeah, you have to do that. Or your sinkers, first cast you make, your sinkers will go flying across the river. They're gonna be.
So the bottom line is this is a really complicated method, but if you learn how to do this, and this is going to be more in the advanced side of it, okay, but you can learn it quickly and you will catch so many more fish. So initially I fished inline, okay, and George fished drop shot, and I thought I was pretty good, and we'd go out and that sucker was catching 5, 6 to 1 over me. And I mean, I'm fishing right by him in the same holes, the same flies. And it's like, okay, after probably 3 weeks or so, a month maybe of fishing with George, it's like, I give up. Okay, I give up. Show me what the freak you're doing here, because you're just kicking my butt. And so he taught me, how to rig up like this. And I knew drop shot a little bit differently, but then, I doubled or tripled my catch rate. I still don't catch as many as George, but the point is, just fishing with someone who's better than you, I mean, it's obvious if he's catching a lot more fish, he's better. And so I went over to this system. Well, Jason, my buddy who kind of taught me how to fish inline, we hadn't fished together for about a year. He'd had surgery and had lost his job and whatnot. And when I went back with him after fishing with George, I was just smoking him, and he was always out fishing me. And I finally just said, well, why don't you fish this drop shot method? And he's like, I don't like it. He says, I like to be able to cast. So when you're fishing inline, and the weight is above the flies, it's not flopping around like a bolo, right? You can actually cast it, more like a dry fly. And he says, I just enjoy casting a lot more than catching a lot of fish. And he still catches a lot of fish. And so, a lot of it sometimes becomes your preference. But the bottom line is this technique that George uses. And if you guys and the members learn how to fish this over time, they'll outfish anybody they're with.
Remember that? Remember the dude up on the green the day I caught the 25-incher and the 24-incher and a bunch of other fish? He was fishing with a night crawler, and his name was actually George. And at the end of the day, he walks up to me, Lindsay, and he says, George, you're the first fly fisherman that's ever out fishing.
True story.
True story.
Here's another story. Last night, I was watching a video, or I was watching YouTube, just kind of decompressing, and a title came up. It says, I haven't indicator fished in 10 years. So I pulled his deal up, and he's a guide. And he says, what he does is he dry fly fishes, okay? But when you can't be a guide and just dry fly fish, because if the fish aren't rising, you aren't going to catch any fish. So what he does is he does what's called a dry dropper. Okay, so where this indicator is right here, he has a dry fly. Okay, and then he has a single line dropping down like this with a nymph on it. Okay, so his dry fly up here acts as his indicator. And and he says, well, some of the other guides say, well, don't you like to catch a lot of fish? And he says, I may not catch quite as many, but almost as many. And I was telling this to George today. And what do you think of that, George?
I don't believe him. I mean, if you're only fishing in the summertime when all the bugs are coming off and fish are rising to flies, yeah, you could probably, a good.
And that's what he said. That's what he said. He said, I really only guide during the summer when all the hatches are coming off.
But when you're fishing, I mean, honestly, fish feed 95% of the time below the surface. They just do. And so it's just a numbers game, right? I mean,
Yes.
don't get me wrong. One of the best days most fun 2 days Lindsay and I have had in a long time was last year on the C section of the green. We went and fished, and we fished these great big Mormon cricket patterns for 2 days. And what we probably caught, I don't know.
The first day when we went, we each caught about 30 fish apiece.
Right. And the next day, I think we caught 30 total, but one of us is rolling half the time, right?
Right.
So
The first
we
day
did
we
about-
went with the guide, and the second day one of us had to row.
and so, but I mean, I didn't fish a nymph on that trip, and we caught, 30 fish a day. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was, it doesn't get much better than that. That's fun.
Well, and the other thing, like I told George, I said, that's all fine and dandy, but if he's fishing any deeper than 2 feet,
Oh yeah, never, you're done.
tell me how he's going to sink this dropper down here 4, 5, 6 feet when all he has is a dry fly and a little nymph.
Well,
He ain't gonna
you
do it.
you could, if you put a great big Chernobyl or one of those great
That's true.
cricket patterns and some kind of a nymph with a 4 millimeter tungsten bead, like a 4 millimeter bead on a Perdigon, you'd get it down in a heartbeat. And that's the only way you could do it. And you could do it. And I've actually, caught, that hole we fished, Lindsay, on the green down below in Seatskiddy where we go across the fence and walk down.
Oh yeah.
I've caught, fish on dry droppers. When I take Shelly there with me, that's how I rig her up. And I mean, I'll put like a quildagon or something on that below a, good buoyant fly, and we just smoke them on that quildagon. I mean, you can do really well, but that's not every day. There's days that fish just won't come up for it. So,
Well, another thing that George is really good at, and you'll have to get good at this if you're going to use this system well, is you've got to keep everything tight.
yeah.
So I went on the Provo River one day and I had this set up, right? I had exactly like this. And about halfway down, I had what's called a Jason's worm. Okay. And it's a big orange worm. Okay. And it was a sunny day and I was up on the bank and I cast across the river to some riffraff. And as the indicator was floating down, I saw a big, huge brown come flying out from underneath the boulders and ate that worm and spit it out. And that indicator didn't even move, not one bit. So and I just thought, how many fish am I missing? So when you fish this method, George, and I've learned from him, is that a lot of times that indicator isn't going to go flying underneath the water. It's just going to pause. It's just going to twitch. So you have 1 second, 2 seconds to set that hook just on a pause. And that's one thing I've noticed George is doing, is he's micro setting all the time. Go ahead, George.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's really pretty much it to sum it up, Linz. It's, learn some knots to tie on your flies. I used to tie a clinch knot all the time, but I use a double Davy knot all the time now because the knot is so tiny and it's easy to tie. It's tiny. And I've never had one come on. I have not had a double Davy knot come undone, where when I tie clinch knots, if I don't tie them right, then they come undone. And that's super frustrating. You lose a big fish and you get up there and went, oh, that was a horrible knot. But anyway, so I use a double Davy to tie my taglines on when I first start. Now I've gone to it's called a figure 8 knot, and you can look up on the internet there on YouTube. There's some really good tutorials on how to tie a figure 8 knot. It's very similar to tying actually a surgeon's knot, just a little different. It's a little cleaner knot, but I do that when I first start. But once I break a tag off or it gets too short, I clip it down and then I'll just come in and tie a surgeon's knot where that knot.
And that's a good point. If you need to practice tying knots, okay? And, you know, when you're watching a movie, just get some old line. If you're driving someplace and, you know, somebody else is driving, just practice tying all these knots. I remember Kimball came with George and I a couple of times up on the Snake, you know, he'd be tying up, you know, 3/4 of the time while we're fishing, you know, and he got kind of frustrated because we're catching a lot more fish than him, but, you know, he took a long time tying the flies or the knots. So become good at tying knots, and, you know, it'll give you more time on the water. So anyway, thanks, George. Appreciate that. That was awesome. Great knowledge. And I want to open it up. Does anybody have any questions about anything before we close out here on anything?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I realize we got to learn how to do this ourselves, but maybe I'm being lazy here, but could you do a rig up and put it in the store where I can buy that, and the only knot I have to tie is right there at my fly line and start fishing?
You bet. Yeah. In fact, the Euro nymphing world, okay, and we'll be talking more about that. That's a lot more complicated. Usually the rigging even, well, about the same. And they've got pre-made leaders like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd be willing for sure to tie up some pre-made leaders just already like that. And you just come in and buy them, and that's a good idea, Shane.
Yeah. Hey, Shane, another thing too for everybody, Shane and Kevin. And this is just a housekeeping thing about going fishing. I used to, you know, throw all my crap in my car and drive up the river, get out of the river and start rigging everything up, right? I do all that stuff at home the night before, man. I make sure
More
the
time on the
line's
water.
good, make sure my leader's good. If it's braided, and I'm just sitting in the kitchen where it's nice and warm or it's air conditioned or whatever. And I get everything ready. So when I get to the river, I put my reel on, string my line, tie the flies on, and Lindsay knows that now, right? I
Oh,
go
yeah.
I mean, I'm on the river like,
Yeah, he's caught 2 fish before I even start fishing.
so so if you want to be more productive on the water, being more enjoyable, just spend a little bit of time at night when you're getting your gear ready for the next day to do that, like housekeeping stuff, you know, make sure you've got the flies you want, that you make sure, you know, just go down the checklist. You know, how many times in the past have we got somewhere where you forgot a fly box, Lindsay, or, you know,
Yeah.
The way to have an enjoyable thing is put stuff, have a routine, and I'm all about routines, right? Routine, same every time, put the same. So
Oh,
I'm a little bit OCD that way, but you know, I've had things, you know, where I've actually had to buy a pair of wading boots because I got somewhere and forgot my wading boots. So, you know, that's an expensive forget, right?
Well, here's a hack too. So those little, they're noodles, okay, that kids swim with. They're foam. If I can get in front of my camera, they're foam, and they're about this. Well, I cut them about that big. They're actually about 4 feet long, and they're about this big around. And you can do your whole rigging of this line right here, and then wrap it around that noodle and stick it in your pack. And I do that when I guide, okay? Because these guys are newbies and they're just snapping off and tangling. And so I just pull a noodle out, pull the leader out, tie it back on, say, there you go.
You know, the swimming noodles that kids use, right? It's just a swimming noodle.
Yeah.
That's a good, I've never done that, Linz, but because I don't worry about doing it for somebody else, but that would be a great idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, if you're guiding 2 guys and they're both all tangled up in a big wad, you know, it's just clip it off, throw it away, pull a noodle out, tie it on. There you go. Clip his off, throw it away, tie it on, you know, instead of spending another half hour.
And here's another hack. This will get tangled. You'll get a fish that'll take this top fly and it'll come out of the water and those sinkers are going everywhere and you'll get that in and you will have a bird's nest sitting on the end of your line, and you're gonna go, oh crap. So just take it from a guy that's done it so many times. Take the sinkers off, cut the flies off, untangle it, tie the flies back on. It's way faster. You know,
Yeah, I think Lindsay did an Instagram video on that. It's definitely worth
yeah,
going.
don't try to untangle the line
Smart
with
idea.
the flies on.
Yep,
It's
I
so
gotta-
brutal.
I have another question here.
sure. Yeah.
And you kind of talked about it a little bit, George. How do you gauge the depth of the water and the speed of the water, right?
Well-
Because I know it's going to be a function of the sinkers that you put on the bottom, but how do you know when you're low enough in the water that you're just right above
Well,
snagging?
here it is. Here it is. I mean, I always err on, I mean, I want to see my sinkers hit the bottom. That's me. I want
Okay.
to know they're on the bottom. And if I'm fishing along and I'm not catching fish, I put on another sinker.
You bring it down lower.
Oh,
Okay.
I want it to get down quicker. I want to make sure it's riding on the bottom. And so, you know, this whole thing about depth of water, moving the indicator, I mean, I do that a lot on the snake because if I don't, I lose flies. But when I'm on the green, I probably put my indicator up there at the top, and I mean, because it'll float down, and you know, I know 10 feet above me about where my flies are going to be. So I'm kind of watching the indicator and where I think my sinkers are. So I'm watching for flashes, and I'm watching that indicator. So if I see a flash, and even if my indicator doesn't move and I see a flash, I'll give it a little hook set, right?
Mm.
So you just kind of just be aware. I mean, because there's times when, you know, I'll see a flash, my indicator doesn't move, set the hook and off to the races. And then the indicator didn't even budge. But you see the flash, right?
Well, and sometimes it's almost like a instinct, right? You're going along and it's just like, I ought to be getting a fish there, and you'll just lift up and have a fish on, especially in the winter.
It's a little bit of it's a little bit of black magic sometimes.
In the summer, and when the water temperature is hot and the fish are real aggressive, it's not as big a deal. But I can't tell you how many times in the winter I just lift my rod up and I've got a fish on.
Well, in the wintertime when the water's cold, you got to hit the fish right on top of the head. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not going to move. So people will say, you know, you stand at a hole and you drift and drift and drift and drift. I watched you drift through there 50 times and you caught a fish. Well, I didn't hit it on the head until the 50th time.
Mhm,
In the
mhm.
summer, when the water temperature, say 50 degrees, right, Linz? Where the water's 50 degrees, those fish are moved. The fish will move 4 or 5
chase
feet
it.
to take some.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's a lot different.
That's good. That's super helpful. So
Any
keep it
other
on the
questions?
bottom.
One other thing that you look at this picture, and this is something that took me a long time to actually realize. If you look at that indicator, how far back the sinkers are. Okay, the sinkers are not straight below you. Okay, they're dragging the bottom. The water speed is higher up on top, and so that indicator is going to be further down the river than your sinkers are, and it's almost at a 45-degree angle like that. So if you understand that, it helps you in your mind, you know, realize, okay, I'm going to be catching fish behind that indicator, not below it, and that type of thing.
And let me say one more thing. You see guys go up to these big deep holes and want to fish these big deep holes. And this
Oh,
is
yeah.
just my opinion because I have no scientific proof for this, just experience of where I catch fish. Fish like to live in the 3 to 5.5 foot. I mean, 3 to 5.5 feet deep. That's kind of where they like to sit. Fish don't sit down in a 20-foot deep hole on the bottom. I mean, maybe the rare, you know, unicorn does, Lindsay. I don't know.
Well, I've seen them like on the green. I mean, Shane's got the best fishing river in the world in his backyard.
Right.
On the green, there's so many fish there, and I'll look down in those big 20-foot holes and I'll see those big fish down in there, and I cannot get them to eat no matter what. To me, I think they just go down in there and go to sleep and hibernate. But when they're ready to eat, they're moving up into that 2 and 3 foot water. Yeah.
And so that's what I say. So this rig right here will fish really, really well from 3 feet to 6 feet, pretty much. Right.
Okay.
So
Cool.
that's probably 80-90% of the water you're going to fish anyway. So if we want to catch a fish, the unicorn and the 20-foot deep hole. We gotta figure that out, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and here's, so when I was on the green, Shane, I'd seen these guys, these guides. The A section is super deep until the last 2 miles. And those guides, they will not get out of their boat. No way. So they're always in their boat. And those guys were catching fish in this 10 and 15-foot deep water. What they did is they had on 16-foot leader and they had a balloon. So instead of a little indicator, they had a balloon that was about as big as a tennis ball. And they had like 15 sinkers on the end of their line to get them deep enough. And I
Yeah.
went with Kirk Windward because he wanted me to guide him, and I was in Alaska or something. And so he went out with a guide, and I asked him if he did that, and he said, yeah. So I said, okay, I want to go with that guy. So I booked a trip, Kirk and I, and we went back, and I had that sucker show me how to do it. And he was catching those fish in that 15-foot deep water, but he had so much weight on, it was ridiculous. I
You
mean,
can't cast that.
10 sinkers to get clear down there. But anyway, I mean, anything's possible, but all right, well, our time's done. We recorded this meeting, so we're gonna have that in archived. And this is really more on a kind of in the specialty area, but I wanted, you know, to have George come on, especially in the winter, where he and I have been using this technique, and it's so fresh on our minds that I think it's just something that will be a big help to a lot of people down the road when they can pull that up out of the archives. All right.
You bet.
So
You bet.
thanks, everybody. I'm going to close this webinar off and then hang on for another 5 minutes. And then we're going to get back on to the affiliate call where we talk about the business stuff. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'm
Thanks,
gonna,
George.
Thanks, George.
I'm going to
Thanks.
stop this recording here.
Okay.
Hopefully I do it with